welcome to When Burnout Becomes Reality, a podcast that combines lived experience with the scientific knowledge of burnout to help listeners prevent, recover, and grow from burnout. My name is Shannon Swales, a human and clinical psychologist with both lived experience and scientific knowledge and skills in burnout. It is my hope that the values of authenticity, compassion, wisdom, and community shine through in each and every episode of the pod. Episodes that share my own and others' lived experiences of burnout and interviews expert guests to help listeners build awareness and hope to prevent, recover, and grow from burnout. The views, opinions, tips, and the like expressed by myself or my guests are not a replacement of personalised therapy. Just like I have done for myself and many of my guests, I encourage those of you that are suffering to seek professional help. Hi, and welcome to episode 26. This episode provides the listener with the opportunity to learn from clinical psychologist Rebecca Black. She shares with us two very important areas that are associated with burnout, and that is dealing with our schemas, namely unrelenting standards, and also chronic illness, focusing on fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome. For those who don't know, schemas are mental structures of preconceived ideas, a framework representing aspects of the world or a system of organising and perceiving new information. The great thing about having Rebecca on the pod is that she has lived experience of both of these things, chronic illness, fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome, and also dealing with her unrelenting standards. She blends both her lived experiences and also her expertise as a clinical psychologist in this episode, guiding us through understanding these elements, understanding the chronic stress load, and ways in which to approach and start to overcome these things. So grab a drink, tea, coffee, whatever you like to, and sit back and listen to this episode. And thank you for following When Burnout Becomes Reality podcast. So hi, Rebecca, and welcome to the pod. How are you going this morning?
Hello, thank you for having me. I am good this morning. It's really beautiful and sunny here over in SA, so it feels like it's going to be a glorious day.
Oh, fantastic to hear. Same here as well. Brisbane's been having these glorious blue days, but also cold again. And it's September.
Weird.
I know, it's like winter. We're just going to come back and just touch a little bit before we go away for good for the next 5 months.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad that you're having lovely weather down there in SA as well. First of all, I was wondering if you can give us a bit of a snapshot of who Rebecca Black is, sharing a bit about your, I suppose your professional journey and where relevant personal journey, just to help us get to know you and what brings you here.
Beautiful, I can do that. So I am a clinical psychologist. I run my own solo private practice, which is predominantly telehealth. And there I work with therapists and health professionals on some of the patterns that they might have. And I also work with people who might have diagnoses of chronic health conditions like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome. And I also have a second business, which is called Sustainable Therapists. It's a coaching business. And there I work with therapists again, so psychologists, health professionals, and we focus on creating a sustainable career and a sustainable life. So one where, their lives are abundant and energetic and joyful and fulfilled, all of those lovely, beautiful things that we're all usually looking for. So that's very much the work that I do. And obviously, I'm sure you would be thinking that involves a bit of burnout in there as well. So a bit of overlap with what you do too. But I guess on the personal level, the reason why I'm so in this space and why I love working in this space and why it's so important and nourishing to me is that I was diagnosed with chronic health conditions myself. So about 15-ish years ago now, I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and very soon after fibromyalgia as well, and then a few other conditions that came through that journey as well. But they were the the predominant ones.
Mm.
And so I spent a lot of time not just going through that journey, but really delving into the research of it, trying to understand what was happening for me and implementing all of the strategies that I possibly could to try to heal myself. And now I'm at a point where I can say I no longer meet criteria for any of those chronic health conditions, which is very cool and against what most people told me as I went through that journey. And I feel really called now to help people create sustainable lives, healthy lives, lives where they can be free of burnout or these conditions of chronic health conditions that people can have. And at the moment, I'm really excited about working with health professionals in particular, because I know there's a beautiful flow-on effect then where they can help their clients become more sustainable and heal and, you know, not go through the 15-year experience that I had to go through.
Well, that's so really beautiful. Like, it's really out of your lived experience and healing yourself and working on that, you know, that 15 years that brings you to this space of almost like passing it on, you know, being able to help others, and particularly with health professionals in that area. And that's how I connected with you, seeing you in the social media space with at Sustainable Therapists. That was the first connection. And just that word, sustainable, and hearing that's what you help people with, sustainable living, sustainable working. That word is just so important to me, and that's what stuck out, I think, when I discovered or found you. I was just like, sustainable, yes. Trying to find a sustainable way of living, and I see it as living, not just working. A sustainable way of life, but obviously work comes into that, what's sustainable. And I'm so grateful that you know, coming on the pod as well, because it's important. Important part that just springs up around burnout, the chronic stress, is these chronic illnesses like you've been through, the chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. That this is sometimes what I've noticed other people experiencing burnout have as well. So I'm so grateful that you come and share your wisdom on that. So do you mind sharing a little bit about, I suppose, those chronic illnesses, chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, in the research space and amongst health professionals, there's a lot of, I guess, missing consistency around what these are and where they come from and how they develop. But what we do know is chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia both present with very similar symptoms. So often there's, unsurprisingly, based on the name, quite a bit of fatigue. A bit of pain as well. So pain goes across both of them. Fibromyalgia is one that typically does have pain. Sometimes people with chronic fatigue syndrome won't, but there's certainly fatigue in the fibromyalgia experience as well. There's often things like brain fog. People often have migraines and headaches. There's often IBS issues as well, sleep disturbances. There's so many different aspects that come along with these experiences. And really, if it's okay, I might talk a little bit about why they kind of sit in our body, or what kind of happens when they develop. Because it applies quite a bit to burnout as well. And I try not to,
but actually, as you were describing all those symptoms and the differences and similarities across those two chronic illnesses, I was like, well, God, that's most of my clients, myself. I'm like, fog, IBS issues, the fatigue. I'm like, tick, tick, tick. Like, that. I think this is often the really hard and frustrating, and can be frustrating part, sort of deciphering these different diagnoses and the crossovers that they have. Anyway, so please keep sharing that you know.
It's great that you say that, actually, because I try really hard when I'm working with people not to get too caught up in the over-analyzing part of it, because it can be really easy for us to kind of go, why do I have this? And I have to learn every single thing about it. And what's this HPA axis that I need to read about? Or like, there's all of these I guess, a real depth that we try to go into to understand ourselves. But sometimes that actually takes away from us doing the healing, because we're busy just trying to know and know and know and know instead of heal. Right?
I totally agree too. Finding that balance. Yes. Okay. And you did the same in your healing practices, going to find out the, information, exploring and understanding the why, but not letting it take over. The other important part is we can still even heal without knowing the depths of why, right? There's still healing we can do, because we are aware that, well, we're feeling fatigued in the moment, we're the brain fog, all that kind of stuff. There are some healing practices that health professionals like ourselves can help people with. Anyway, so
absolutely.
Definitely such an important point. I'm glad that you brought it up.
Absolutely. So I try to keep, because of that, I do really try to keep my explanations like as simple as possible, rather than going into the depths of all the chemicals and things like that might be happening, or what might be happening to neurotransmitters or things like that. So to explain it, I normally go back to caveman days. So if any of my clients are listening, they will laugh, because I constantly say we're going back to caveman days again, because it is so important, because this is when our brains were wired to be the way that they are now. And in caveman days, what really mattered was survival, right? So we're so focused on, we have to survive. We pass on our genes so that our species survives, but individually we need to survive to do that. And so, as we know, if a tiger comes out in front of us in caveman days, our fight or flight system is activated, and that fight or flight system, the amygdala in the brain, switches on and says, right, we've got to activate a bunch of stuff in the body. So we're going to be experiencing adrenaline and cortisol, all of those beautiful hormones that allow us to then run or fight the tiger. So we have that fight or flight experience. And what would happen is we try to run away, right? And we either die, which then none of this matters, or we survive. And when we survive, for whatever reason, maybe we outran them, or maybe, we had other people come and help us with the tiger, we have this moment of going, oh no, like we were close to not surviving. The primary thing that we're here for, we almost didn't do. And so now I need to be on hyper alert to make sure that I survive if this tiger's to come out again. And so we know that then we might be going out in our day-to-day, and if the bush rustles next to us, we're like, oh no, there's a tiger. Or if there's a snap of a twig nearby, tiger. And so where each time that happens, that fight or flight response is becoming triggered. So our central nervous system, which governs that fight or flight response, and our immune system that's connected to it as well, they're activated in those moments. So we start to have these triggerings again and again and again. And typically in caveman days, after a while, we would realize we're safe. The tiger's not coming back. It was a once-off moment. We're okay. And we kind of go back to homeostasis. Our body goes back to this beautiful balance. But in the real world, in this world now, we are faced with so many tigers. There are so many tigers in front of us. So we have, work deadlines, we might have relationship stresses, we might be managing parenting. There's so many things that can trigger that same response in our body, that fight or flight response, and triggering it consistently again and again and again. In chronic illnesses like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome, there is typically a viral component to it. So often people who have these experiences will have had something like glandular fever, known as like Epstein-Barr virus or Ross River virus, or now we're looking at, COVID and long COVID in that space as well. And that's like a physical stress on the body. But when they've healed from that, or they're starting to come out of that experience, we just go back to these stresses again, right? We go back to, now I've got deadlines at work and I'm doing all the parenting, and I can't just lay in bed all day the way that I was when I was perhaps feeling unwell. And so the body starts to get stuck in this loop, in this experience of fight or flight being activated, and then being hyper vigilant, being on edge, being ready and prepared for that tiger to come again. And when we get stuck in that loop again and again and again, I mean, if we go back to caveman days and imagine, if you were running from that tiger nonstop, if you were running for a day, 2 days, 3 days, eventually the body's going to have to step in a bit here and give you a very loud message. Eventually we're going to collapse. We're not going to be able to keep running. And so this is what we often see when we get to that burnout space or the chronic illness, is that real, like, I just can't keep going, the same as we would visually imagine if we were running nonstop from a tiger. And unfortunately with chronic illness, we also end up with our bodily symptoms becoming the tiger. Our bodily symptoms are the trigger. We get a bit tired, or we become, we might have a heart palpitation, or we might have some pain, and then we become hypervigilant for that. And that keeps us stuck in this cycle of burnout. And the body just keeps having to give these messages of, please stop, please stop, please stop. If you're not going to stop doing all of these things, I probably need to tell you to stop by stopping you.
Like the body will speak. Yeah.
And we'll speak loudly. It will shout if we're not listening to being tired, or we're not listening to being more tearful, or we're not listening to getting resentful. It will eventually shout. And sometimes that looks like, here's chronic fatigue syndrome, here's fibromyalgia. I'm going to make you bedridden because you're not listening.
Thank you for that explanation. I even, learning bits from that as well. And I was just, so I might not be getting this right, but it just sounds like it's a chronic tapping of that fight and flight, that's happening, whether on the surface we're calling it chronic fatigue, and I mean, I might be butchering this a bit, but those are maybe how it presents. But like you said, if there's been a virus too, that often you see that the virus that can then lead that chronic stress that's going on to something like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue. Whereas for someone else, burnout. But even people experiencing chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia can experience burnout because, like you said, the physiological symptoms become, I mean, they've got their normal everyday stresses, which can be very demanding and constantly under stress. So chronic stress, which can lead to burnout. With those workload issues or life load issues, but that the chronic illness symptoms itself being a stressor, a tiger. And so that's leading them to burnout. And I haven't delved into the research in that, but I have seen papers about burnout as a result of living with a chronic illness as well. So like fibromyalgia. So, or anything that's chronic and ongoing that someone's needing to manage, that in and of itself can become a stressor with noticing those symptomatic changes that so like pain with fibromyalgia, and I do know a few loved ones with that condition, and the physical pain that you said that is often a prominent symptom in that. That's something they do report, that nerve pain.
Absolutely. And you're so right, like the chronic illness burnout is such a big thing, because there is so much to manage when we have a chronic illness. So not only are we desperately trying to get through day-to-day tasks, when we actually don't have the capacity to do them, the demands of the daily tasks will sometimes exceed our capacity, so exceed what we have in us. But we're also like, let me gather my thoughts for a moment. Just being able to do those tasks is hard. Just being able to shower, just being able to cook meals or order meals, or just getting out of bed to the couch. I know for me at times that was a really hard experience. But there's also, like, on top of that, often with chronic illnesses, we're looking at multiple health appointments too. So we might have a multidisciplinary team around us. So we might be trying to see all of these different specialists, and just getting there and having those appointments and getting home can be huge and exhausting. And then there's the loneliness, like the emotional things that come, the loneliness, the isolation, loss of identity. And we're having to manage that emotionally as well. And the mental load, like there's a whole mental load in having a chronic illness. I even remember when I used to cook in the kitchen, and this was when I was quite unwell. When I would cook in the kitchen, I would automatically map out like a plan of how to get from one side of the kitchen where the fridge was to the other side of the kitchen where the pantry was, and then back to the stove to cook in the least amount of steps. So I would be like grabbing the fork that I would only need at the end when I'm eating at the very start, because that was near the fridge. And while I'm grabbing the things I needed out of the fridge, then I'd move closer to where the plates were. And it would just be this big task of kind of mapping it out so that I wouldn't be walking as much, which would be too much for my energy levels. So that mental load is just things that people never think about, that people don't have to think about unless you've had a chronic health condition like that.
God, thank you for sharing that very very real experience, just to really share the enormity of that energy and where you had to just down to being in the kitchen, that we, you know, able-bodied people, including myself, you know, take for granted, that, you know, that I can just do without thinking. And that's a mental load, because you're having to problem solve that, work that out to help manage your health and well-being at the time. And that, that takes a load. It makes me think of, because I've heard of it, the spoon theory.
Love the spoon theory.
And I learned through the chronic illness space. So I learned, because it's one that I think's come from there, and that a lot of people, you know, with chronic illnesses do use. And I think it's such a lovely, especially in that space, but also I think in general to, because the spoon theory, you probably can explain it better than I can, but it's just essentially, you know, if I remember it rightly, is how much energy we wake up for. We have so many spoons per day in terms of energy. And I kind of, rather than seeing as spoons, I just think, you know, what's my energy levels today? And I don't even do sort of number rating, but kind of just an observing rating. But for some, and then thinking about how we distribute those spoons to what we have on that day. And for someone with a chronic illness, obviously that looks very different to someone who's able-bodied. But we might be able-bodied, but maybe we're just overcoming a virus, you know, being sick. So I think the spoon theory, thinking about our energy levels every day regularly, is an adaptive process to help us manage and make changes where we can to our lows. But when chronically ill, I know those spoons there's very little.
Yes.
And like you said, things like even moving around your home, having a shower, getting out of bed could take a lot of spoons, you know, and you might only have 5 that day, and that can take all of those, you know, having a shower, getting out of bed. Depending on,
you can borrow from the next day sometimes, but if you borrow, then you've only got 1 spoon for the next day. Like it's a really tricky thing to navigate.
Thank you. I always forget about that borrowing, because that then that really helps put into context what often I see and did myself with what contributed to my burnout, which was overextending myself. Yes, I was borrowing from the next day, energy I didn't have, and I did that way too often, which, you know, and I wasn't aware that that's what I was doing at the time, or aware but ignored, and certainly contributed to my burnout, amongst other things. But I feel like it really opened up that world of really understanding, so that or starting to understand how or what chronic illness, and particularly that fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue is, but also how it relates or connects to burnout, how they kind of sort of interrelate. And I really just heard that, and this language comes from the Nagorsky sisters, who wrote a book called Unlocking the Secrets of the Stress Cycle. But the main thing that I learned from them reading their book was that we're not completing our stress cycle, meaning we're not. Because I think about the caveman days, I often talk about, well, in caveman days, they tended to have periods of rest and connect, and you know, back in their safety zone, it might be the cave, and they had their family around them, their tribe. There might be rituals that they were partaking in, but it was more sort of that parasympathetic nervous system, you know, helping with that central nervous system uptake with that fight and flight, that they had these spaces that they could come back to, so they could complete their stress cycle, that fight and flight. But that often in our modern day living, like you said, there's so much going on, especially if you're living with a chronic illness, that there's no sort of, like when do you complete the stress cycle? Like, you know, when do you get, and or putting in place, or even knowing that we need to put in place these rest, connect, play, have fun, and again, which are huge challenges when you've got a chronic illness. And those things can actually be really painful, or are.
I love that. I love that book, and I love that way of talking about it. I think it's really, really helpful. And as you're saying, one of the main things that they talk about, that one of the best things that we can do to complete the stress cycle is physical movement. And unfortunately, for people with chronic health conditions, particularly chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, well, movement isn't possible.
No.
Movement can cause harm. And so the thing that we really need to complete the stress cycle, we can't actually access as easily. So it's really tricky, and it's about finding these gentle, small ways that we can actually complete that stress cycle in our day. And really, like, healing, I guess, in the chronic illness space is about being able to retrain the brain so that it's not in this cycle all the time, so that it can actually get into those spaces you were talking about of like joy and play, and just communicating to the nervous system and the immune system as well, that it's okay, we're safe, that these aren't tigers, they're actually really cute fluffy bunnies that we can pat. It's okay. And so a lot of the work that we do is in that space.
Do you mind I suppose elaborating a little bit more about those healing practices that help in that chronic illness space, like being able to complete that stress cycle? You're starting to touch on them there, and I feel like I kind of can, even with my psych brain going, oh, is it these strategies? But if you can just share maybe a couple, or just what that looks like a bit more.
There's actually like so many. Like, how long do we want to make the podcast now? Just kidding.
Because it kind of, exactly, we could do a whole series on this, and
there are some easier ones though.
We have a couple of ones that the listeners can grab and take with them. And I think obviously listeners who in that experiencing chronic illness themselves, but even those who aren't, these could be other repertoire of completing the stress cycle outside of physical movement. Other options.
So breathing is a huge one. And breathing is really, I get on my high horse about this because I feel like it's a really undervalued strategy that we have. It's something we always have on us, and it's this beautiful thing it's both in our awareness, it's conscious and unconscious. Like, we can consciously change our breath, you can change your breathing pattern, and it also happens unconsciously. You will just breathe because that's part of living. And we have this beautiful chance where we can actually swap to conscious to help manage that unconscious breathing that might be there. Because when we're in that fight or flight response, we're breathing into our chest, we're breathing quite fast and rapidly, we're not really taking nice, deep, long, slow breaths into our belly that communicate safety. That ultimately, when we're breathing into our belly, we're telling our body we're not running from that saber-toothed tiger that was chasing us before. We're okay, we're sitting with our family and friends, and we're safe. And so just being able to consciously bring your awareness to the breath and start to breathe down into the belly nice and slow, and breathe out with quite a long out breath, that in and of itself is so powerfully healing, because it takes you from that fight or flight response into that rest and digest and heal response. So from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic nervous system. And so, this is something that people can do if they're bedridden. Like, I
love how you said that, communicating safety, breathing this way communicates safety to your system. Just how you phrase it, I was like, oh, that's such a real, like, yes, it does, but just putting it in that way just kind of even warms my heart. Like, and you're right, like, and I think as an early career psychologist too, I undervalued the breath. I don't now. But and it's a fundamental teaching. So that deeper breath, to bring that, because unconsciously, as you said, in that fight and flight, we're breathing shallow ways, and doing that deeper breath will really help communicate safety.
Absolutely. And I really love, I do talk about it like that quite often, no matter who I'm working with. I think it's important for us to always think about, what message am I giving my body right now? And what message is my body giving me? And just having this beautiful, loving, reciprocal experience with our nervous system, with our body. And so if we are, breathing really shallowly, what is that? What message is that giving my nervous system right now? And can I change it so that it is safety?
Yeah. And it
And we
gives
can do
control.
that.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, it gives control back as well. I mean, we don't control the fact that the fight and flight has been triggered, but having that really beautiful relationship, checking in with what's my body telling me and what can I do for my body, it gives a sense of help, like that I could do something here. I can help myself here. And that's so important. I hear that a lot with the burnt out clients, that feeling a helplessness, a hopelessness, that in what they're feeling and what they're going through. And this, often these kind of strategies starts to give that message back that, there's something I can do. There's something I can do to support my body who's in this chronic state at the moment, this chronic stress.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Yeah.
And
And was there another? Yeah.
I guess to go on the other side of things, something that can kind of, because often I guess if we're in these chronic illness spaces, we can often be experiencing depressive symptoms as well, because obviously similar to burnout, it's robbed us of many of the things that we love. We're not actually able to engage in the things that bring us joy or those kinds of experiences. So we actually do work on trying to cultivate a little bit of joy, because again, when you're running from that tiger, you're not kind of dancing and doing a pirouette as you're running and having these joyful experiences along the way. You're just trying
You're
to
in survival mode. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's like, gotta get the hell out of here.
Yes. And so joy is another beautiful way that we can actually communicate to our body we must be safe, because we wouldn't be being joyous if we were being chased here. And recognizing that we may not be able to get the same level of joy or the same experience of joy that perhaps we've had in the past, and really radically, I guess, accepting that. But are there tiny pieces of joy that I can get? Can I be a little bit playful with a partner, or watch a really silly clip on Instagram? Or, is there something that can just make me laugh? Or is there a memory I can tap into of childhood where we did something really funny? And can I connect with that and let my body feel that joy? And we want to do this in like gentle bits, because we also know that sometimes big experiences of joy or excitement or things like that can also trigger that fight or flight response, can also feel like a bit much for the body. But we just do it in these like gentle little bite-sized bits. We work up to it and allow ourselves to have that, again, sense of safety and sense of nourishment for the nervous system.
The word nourishment, which is the name of your business as well. Part of your, nourish, I love that word too, that it gives back not just safety, but a sense of nourishment. And your wise words there too about the importance of, sometimes joy can be overwhelming, too much to the nervous system. And I think that's something that I know I have overlooked personally, but professionally. So that's a really important message out there. And that's when we can do the bite-sized pieces, break it up to smaller moments of joy. One of the others I remember, as I worked a little bit in the chronic illness space back pre-burnout, and just a few clients I'm working with, then joy with like pets, if they have pets, and but like you said, really allowing yourself to nourish and feel and connect. Often, we would talk about that and work on being able to attend to that moment of joy as well. And I'm just, my memories going back to those experiences of clients dealing with chronic illnesses and finding those moments of joy.
Little glimmers.
That word glimmers, I love that. I only discovered that recently. I love that word, because then I had those moments of joy, those little moments, and I'm like, glimmer.
I love that.
Actually, I had one this morning. See, I'm going off on a tangent. This morning, my little dog Hannah, she comes most of the mornings when I'm lying out on the couch. She'll come and join me, and it's always like a little ritual of she likes the fanfare. She loves attention, and I love giving it to her. And she gives it back too sometimes, but whatever. She's her own woman. And but we were just lying there though, and I knew I had to get up soon, but she was in my nook. She was just here, and I went, this is a glimmer moment. I'm just going to soak this up a little bit more. And I tended to her in the moment, and but knowing that word and knowing that value of the importance to nourish your soul, it all helps me take, and hopefully those who are listening, be able to take those moments that are there. We just we don't necessarily know the value of attending to them, or
Yeah.
yeah.
And in positive psychology, they use a beautiful word, savoring, like
Oh, that word. I forgot
savoring
about that
those
one.
moments. Yes.
Savoring.
So actually
Yeah.
just allowing that moment, even after it's finished. So even after your gorgeous dog came out of your nook, just to
Well,
be able to
I had to
stay in
move
it.
her because I had to get up and
Oh,
do my work, go to work. Well, go to work. I work from
no.
home, but I was like,
Yes.
"Oh." But I put it like, so I had to disturb her slumber. She would not move till walking
Oh,
time. That's when she,
bless.
yeah,
That's so
yeah.
sweet.
Mm.
But you could still even attend to that now. Like we could close our eyes and you could remember what that felt like and really soak that in and savor that moment. Like there's so many beautiful ways that we can do that for ourselves.
Well, that's so beautiful. So thank you for sharing those two, what seems so small but gives so much, our
Yes.
breath, and breathing in that deep, slow way. And, that gives back that sense of safety, but then also to attend to little moments of joy, glimmers, and
Yes.
attending to that and finding that. And like you said, sometimes that can be really hard because living with a chronic illness or even living with burnout, we can be experiencing depression as well. And so that makes it really hard. And that's where working with a therapist who can help with that is so important, to guide you with those practices and help support you getting to that space. I feel like they're sort of shifting attention a little bit here, but still staying on the same track, because I know another area that you work in and that I wanted you on the pod for as well to share that wisdom was around dealing with the mind, which in the, I imagine in the, I know in the burnout space, but the chronic illness space, just in the chronic stress space, and life, we don't even need to have just life.
Yes.
Dealing with our mind, and I know you use the word schemas, but yeah, I suppose just turning towards that and talking to dealing with the mind and I don't even know how else to articulate that, but can you sort of share, and even maybe starting, if you're okay, with how that might have showed up in your healing from chronic illness, and with what was showing up and what you were dealing with in your mind and how you worked with that, because that's we know as psychologists, that's and mental health professionals know this out there, and a lot of other people, like our mind in and of itself can be contributing to that stress as well, and contributing to our mood states and our other feeling states. So it's a really important aspect. So
Absolutely.
Taking us there.
Definitely. And this was a huge part of my journey, is working in my mind. And I want to be really clear for any listeners that have been told, chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia is all in your head. That's not what we're talking about right now. But certainly the way that we think influences how we are in the world and influences this stress cycle. And we want to actually address some of those thoughts and beliefs and experiences that leave us stuck and not completing the stress cycle that we're in. So it's definitely not that this is all in your head, because it 100% is a thing. No doubt about that.
Thanks, Rebecca, for clearing. Yeah, so important in that.
But the mind is so important. And honestly, I found myself, I did a lot of things like in my healing. So I went and saw so many different practitioners, from like nutritionists, kinesiologists, chiropractors, massage therapists. Like I got the whole team behind me. And it was really funny because I noticed that I would be helping people in the clinic recover, and they would be, they'd come in and be like, I just did a 5K run, and be like, amazing, I can't walk my dog. Like there was just this realization that there was a bit of a gap where I could see that they were certainly making all these incredible gains, and there was something that I was missing, because I wasn't getting to that same space. I would call myself for quite some time about 80% healed. So I was able to attend to work and manage things very relatively well. But I was still restricted in terms of particularly my physical capabilities. And of course, it came down to my thinking. That was the part that I wasn't getting as much help with, because I was in the kind of mindset, I guess I'm a psychologist, I can do that myself. Well,
I'm familiar with that one too.
Yes.
I'm a psychologist, I can do it myself. And anyway, keep going.
And absolutely no, that's actually not true. And so I did start to do some work with someone, but I also then started to actually apply a lot of the things that I would be helping other people in the clinic with to myself. I think there was a real time in my life where I just wasn't doing that work as much as I would have liked to. It just wasn't my time to be doing it yet. It's just part of my journey, I guess. But in amongst that, what was really helpful was looking at schemas. So as you mentioned, I predominantly practice from a schema therapy framework, and schemas are, I guess, these patterns that we have. We've all got them. Every single person on this planet has their own set of schemas. And they're just these very, very present, very pervasive patterns that we have in the way we think, in our beliefs, in our emotional experiences, in the way we feel in our body, in our memories, all of those sorts of things. And they're things that we typically develop in childhood. We typically carry them for a long time in our life, and they just feel like part of who we are. Often we don't even notice them because they're just how things have been for us, the way that we have been. And these patterns, these schemas typically influence what we do and don't do. And one of the most common patterns that comes up, one of the most common schemas that comes up for people in the space of chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, and certainly was the case in my own life, is unrelenting standards. And normally I just say that word and the people in front of me are like, I know this is going to be me just from that word.
It makes sense, to a lot of people when you give that title.
Absolutely. It like packs a punch. And so unrelenting standards is a schema or a pattern in which we strive, I guess, to meet these really high standards of ourselves. So it's often to avoid criticism. It often looks like perfectionism, for example. There are often these rigid rules that are involved. So the language that we often hear with this pattern is like should, must, have to, always. And so often people are holding these ideas of like, I should be doing that, or I should be doing more, I need to do more, and I need to do this, which carries quite a lot of pressure. And there's also this preoccupation, I guess, with both achievement. So getting things done, this achievement kind of orientation, and there's a sense of efficiency being important. So often there's quite a focus on time and getting things done quickly. The whole to-do list that's there of many, many, many items, getting it done as fast and quickly as we can. So there's often quite a lot of rush, which also communicates to the nervous system that we are not safe because we are rushing from that tiger now. And so that pattern is a really common one. It certainly was the loudest that I had and had to work with. I don't know whether it was a similar experience for you in your burnout.
Oh, definitely. The unrelenting standards was part of it, and one I see very common amongst those I work with, that, certainly we've conceptualized, burnout or compassion fatigue, and even vicarious trauma, that secondary stress, trauma stress. Unrelenting standards. And often, like you said, it sort of fits into that perfectionism because there's that high expectations that tend to be there, and the standards are unrelenting. And I think you mentioned there too that not wanting to let down others, or being like that focus, on achievement, which often in the way I conceptualize perfectionism, or the not way I do, the way, like, particular definition that I go by with perfectionism that comes from, I think it's CBT, so way of conceptualizing it is those schemas, that you've just, you mentioned there. And it was my, always, I call myself a recovering perfectionist. It's a way to help me to still be aware of that schema at play, because it's something I lived by without really knowing, or eventually knowing, but still behaving or responding as for a long time. So I say recovering just so I stay aware and keep putting in place the things. But sorry, long answer to yes, I do.
Yes, and it's super common in this space. And unfortunately, when we think about what this means for the nervous system, if we're, always having to strive, if we're always having to do better, do more, it's kind of this do, rush experience. The message that we're giving our nervous system is we're not safe. Like there is a threat, that there is something to be stressed about. And so we get stuck in that cycle through this experience. And it can be things like, one example that comes up quite often is when people come over to somebody's house to visit, and they might quickly clean the house to, from the floor to the ceiling, and make sure that it looks really great for people to come into, because underneath that, there's some other stuff going on, which we'll talk about in a moment. But if we're doing those kinds of things in all the spaces of our lives, then we're going to be over exhausting ourselves. Again, that idea of the demands that we have exceed our capacity, because no human can meet these unrealistic, unobtainable standards. I'm sorry if you can hear my dog crying in the background.
I thought it was your cat, but was it moving around? But it's your dog.
A big greyhound.
A big greyhound. Oh my God, cute.
Yes,
oh, you can see. So our own mind can trigger off, well, those schemas, to be more specific, and trigger off that stress response, can that there's a threat here, that we don't feel safe because, okay, we've got to meet this expectation, and so we're constantly doing. And so that's tapping that system itself as well, keeping us stressed and creating or contributing to those health issues.
Absolutely. And we often find, sorry, so much to say about these things. We often find, even when people do try to rest, when they've got this schema there, when they've got the unrelenting standards, and they might know in their mind, like, I do need to rest, I should be resting, this will be part of my healing for the chronic illness. When they're actually sitting there resting, there's a big bunch of guilt, because the actual dialogue that's going on in the head is, well, I should be doing something else, I should be doing more, I should be doing X, Y, Z. And we don't have that kind of message that actually rest is really important. Actually, rest is more important than achievement. Or we deserve to rest without actually having, done all of the things on the to-do list. All of those messages are missing.
Like, there's a time for rest, and there's a time for achievement, there's a time for everything. But that schema at play creates or contributes to that behavior, or contributes to when you actually are changing the behavior and you are making time for rest or play or connect or whatever. It's like, well, this is not okay, I should be, I'm not being productive. I hear that a lot. So working on that schema is so important as a result, because even if you change your behavior and you're doing those things that are going to be great and really awesome for your central, your nervous system, it's not going to have that payoff, that really great sense of feeling safe and secure and supported, if in our mind we're thinking, this is bad, I shouldn't be resting, I should be meeting all those standards. So I might be jumping here, and please certainly fill in, but like, what did you do to help, like, or what is something we can do to, because I know that schema work, it's something we do as psychologists, and really helping people with doing. It's quite it's like any behavioral change. It's learning, noticing, and being able to change, unlearn and relearn. It's a process, and often one needing to be guided by a professional to help you with that. So please, audience, go out there. But what did you do, and what is maybe something that the audience could take away, listener could take away, to start dealing with the schema? Like this.
So part of it is definitely changing those behaviors, so stopping or lessening the amount that we're maybe trying to be perfect. Again, that, like, as you said, that's something that's usually easiest working through with someone's guidance, as opposed to doing it on your own, because a lot of stuff can come up with those things. I often like to work with people on literally slowing down their body movements. So sometimes with that rush that comes with the unrelenting standards, I'm sure many people will identify with this, perhaps like pre having the chronic illness experience. But the pace of walking, it's often this rushing around the shops and rushing to the car and rushing to work, and really like speeding past people on the street to get all the things done, to get everywhere on time, all of these things that Unrelenting Standards makes us view as important. And so just taking it a little less quickly, just slowing it down in the body can be a really beautiful place to start. But certainly if there are things that we're doing in terms of the perfectionism, in terms of, you know, you might be like over editing something that you're writing, or
over planning sessions. I used to do that one, like,
yes,
because I had to get it right, and it's, you know, my standards, you know, like it's so I would over plan.
Yes, or attending so many professional developments. That's something that I would do a lot of too.
Got
to learn it all.
Yes. Yeah, like spend hours reading. I remember, researching, getting the right information.
Yes.
Yeah, but that over planning. So yeah, so it's I love this. Like it's there's so much of that schema that comes out in our behavior. And so starting to make changes there. And I love the whole even starting with that walking pace, like the pace to things and slowing that down.
Yeah. We also have to be conscious, because there's, I guess, the more obvious things like that, where we're like, oh, I know that I try to clean the house from head to toe before someone comes. Maybe I could not do the windows this time around. There's those kind of behavioral things that we might be able to see quite easily, but there's also the stuff that's underneath the schema. So Unrelenting Standards is what we call in schema therapy a secondary schema. So there's actually something else bubbling away under the surface that's making us feel like we need to hold all of these standards that we might have. So it can be really helpful to start to ask yourself some questions. It might be, you know, if I didn't do this, if I didn't do this particular thing, if I didn't clean the house from head to toe, what am I scared of? Like, what am I worried will happen? Is it that I'm worried that people won't love me, that people will leave? Is it that I'm worried that people will think I'm not good enough, or that they'll see that I'm defective in some way, or they'll think I'm a failure? You know, what is actually underneath that behavior? And then we can actually start to, in schema therapy, we call it like reparenting. So we can start to give ourselves some of the messages that perhaps we missed out on when we were growing up, so that we can know that, hey, you're beautiful just as you are. Like, I love all of you. You don't need to do all of the things to be worthy. You're worthy just because. Or like we were saying before, like you don't have to earn your rest, or rest can absolutely be the priority, or done is good enough. Or it's better for it to be done and imperfect than to be perfect and be draining you in the way that it is. All of these beautiful messages that we might need to be hearing for ourselves, so that we can lessen some of those other behaviors that we're doing over the top of that.
So really, needing to, yourself having that knowledge that that is a secondary and there's something underneath, and the underneath, it comes from that sense of needing to belong, or connect. I think like that caveman, because like one of the things in order to survive that we need as a species, and still to this day we're innately drawn to, is a sense of belonging. Being connected to others we're hardwired to survive in that way. So what I'm feeding that secondary schema Unrelenting Standards can be those things that keep us alert to not belonging, like that needing to be liked, to loved, all those things that we look out for. And and then that means, well, if we're getting a sense that we're not, and we need to do these things we're in constant threat, we're in that fear mode,
exactly,
in order to drive towards the need to belong. It's just but I love the solution there that comes from schema therapy. I love that term, reparenting. And I have heard that. I didn't realize schema therapy, that's what they use it to. But I remember someone I went to uni with, they went into the not sure if they're still in that field, but alcohol and other drugs addictions, and working in the centers there, inpatient and rehab facilities. And I remember her commenting once that often her work is really about reparenting, really. And it's the first time I heard that term. And it was really beautiful. I mean, it was so long ago now, but it always stuck with me. So because often, for whatever reason, and there's many, we didn't get what we needed at that time to feel a sense of self-acceptance, right? And the kind of feeling that we are lovable just as we are. We don't need to change anything. Change if you want to, but you don't. You as a human being are lovable.
Without doing all the things.
You don't need to prove it. You don't need to have someone else say that yes, you're okay, you're an okay person, although that's sometimes nice, but you don't.
We'll soak it in when it happens.
Soak it in. Savor
That's
when
right.
that experience happens. I learned that I used to like shove any kind of compliments or things away. But there was a tool that was taught to me, and maybe I picked up in cycle, maybe when I've seen therapists, but that just start small, just say thank you. You don't have to change that behavior. So behavior of acceptance, even if you don't feel it. And in time, taking it in, savoring it, and definitely more at that space now. Beautiful. But hey, so working with that schema is it's certainly working on that more primary. And like I was just wondering if you could just maybe one kind of technique, because how you said it's about reparenting and giving yourself that love. Is there anything particular that strategy that you may particularly lean on, or that seems to work with clients, that to tend to that, to I suppose creating that to reparent themselves?
It can just be practicing. I mean, in therapy we will often use chair work, so we put like two chairs opposing each other, and one might be the part of you that's in that struggle, and the other's more the part that's reparenting. And you can imagine the most compassionate, most loving, most gentle person that in the world, and imagine them sharing with you what they would say about you, and really sitting and soaking that in. And typically with people, I'll get us to kind of write that down, or we'll record it so that you can listen to it again and again, because the brain really needs that repetition to get those beliefs happening.
Shifting that schema.
Even just having like one or two sentences that you keep revisiting. And I particularly like to, again, I'm popping my hand on my heart right now for those who can't see, but to take a moment to really feel it in the body and feel what it's like to be loved, or feel what it's like to hear somebody say those beautiful things that you might need to hear. But another way, I guess, that's quite accessible to do those things is through meditations. So on an app like something like Insight Timer, for example, there can be lots of beautiful things that might address some of those beliefs that you need to hear, that can be really lovely and nourishing for people.
And that's such an important point, that repetitiveness that we need, because that understanding we have now of that neuroplasticity of the brain, that we can create and lay down sort of more new neural pathways. So when we feel that suffering, because we're repetitively doing this reparenting strategy, that it comes more naturally and more automatically. Well, that's my lay understanding, not being a neuroscientist or a neuropsych, but that's what I grasp from that. But we do know, regardless of how that all works, that when we do something repetitively, a new behavior repetitively, it becomes more automatic. And so that sense of safety and support that we can give ourselves there. And I love how accessible those things are, because coming back to, particularly with people suffering from chronic illnesses like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, it needs to be something that's accessible to them to help complete that stress cycle, or be able to even circumnavigate that, so we don't get into that stress cycle of that schema pattern. And but also for people, I think, in the early stages of burnout too, like I often find that finding strategies that are accessible to their energy levels currently, because for some that I see, it's quite severe in that they're not working, and they find it difficult to walk their, get up and walk their animals. Walk their dog. Like, what other animal do you walk? I mean, you can walk your cat. I know people, you can. Like, hang on, you can do. People carrying them in the backpacks as well. Get out there in nature with their animals. So they can. But I just feel like it just gives that repertoire of accessibility of things. So if exercise, which I know gets and movement, that going for a walk and things like that are certainly helpful to complete the stress cycle, but it's not accessible to everyone.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
so
I'm
they're
so
really
big on that.
yeah, accessibility, definitely. Yeah. And
What's the
meeting us.
smallest?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, you go. Yeah.
I keep interrupting you.
Oh, I
Just
do the same to you. Sorry.
what is the smallest, easiest, simplest step that
Mm.
you can take?
Mm.
Right. That's I feel like I say that 24/7. If we're looking at this particular thing, what's the smallest, simplest, easiest step that you can take right now towards that goal? So yeah, we might want to get rid of the unrelenting standards schema, but we can't do that all at once, and that might feel too much to do some of the things that we could do. But what's the smallest, simplest, easiest step we can do right now with your energy levels where they're at? And let's just focus on that, because as you said, just doing that is going to be building those neural pathways, and we can keep building towards the bigger picture over time.
Yeah. And that's what over time starts to quieten that schema, doesn't it? Well, that's my understanding.
Yes. Yeah.
That we're not
Overtakes.
attacking that on the forefront or trying to change it like that. It's more about we're over here and we're noticing that, we're aware of it, we have more of an understanding of its presence and how it shows up, but we're over here doing these steps that are helping build a new pathway, a new way of existing that just lessens. This is probably my ACT acceptance coming through, but lessens the volume of that over time.
Exactly.
But yeah, there's so much in what you've shared with us today, Rebecca, in terms of that richness of that connection, or just the interplay of chronic stress, which, I mean, burnout is a chronic stress syndrome, but looking at chronic illnesses and through your own personal, but also and your professional experience of working in that area, just so that interplay of it all, and how to start responding to that as well to manage the stress within the chronic illness space. But then also from that schema, which is another thing that can be happening for certainly people with chronic illness, but also burnout as well, or both, as we know. But yeah, how to work with that mind. So really appreciate all that richness and information that you've given us today. And I was just wondering, is there anything else that you want to leave the listeners with, or those watching as well? Like anything, any last wisdoms to share?
One would be, get as much support as you can. I know it can be really hard, especially letting go with that unrelenting standards part. We want everything to be done really well, and often we feel like we're the people to do that. But as much support as we can get around us is really beautiful. And if you can just start asking yourself, what is this communicating to my nervous system when I'm doing this behavior, when I'm thinking this thing, when I'm believing this thing? What is that telling my body? And could I do it in a different way that helps my nervous system hear safety? And that can be just a really nice place to start for healing with your chronic illness.
Thank you. I love that that could hear safety, that my nervous system can hear safety. Again, that bringing up that relationship. There's me here, and there's my health, my illness, and what I can do for my body and mind that is feeling that at the moment, to help her feel safe, to feel supported. And it makes me think of that parenting bit, because that's often what we need from our caregivers when we're young and so vulnerable, is having an environment, feeling safe enough, supported enough, secure enough.
Absolutely.
So giving ourselves that. Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Well, hey, how could people that would like to, and I'm sure they will, get in touch with you or connect with you? How would they be able to do that, Rebecca?
Yeah, they can. If anybody's looking for therapy, I'm at Nourish, Heal and Grow Psychology. So email is admin@nhgpsychology.com.au. More than welcome to reach out there. And if there are health professionals who are listening to this and thinking, gosh, I am in that cycle, I so know what that's like, and are wanting to create more of a sustainable career and a sustainable life, then you can contact me at Sustainable Therapists. So I'm on Instagram at Sustainable Therapists and Facebook at the same. And you're more than welcome to email me as well at sustainabletherapists@gmail.com.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And just to check too, you mentioned that you're telehealth. So does that mean you people all over Australia, or where?
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of connecting with,
anywhere. Happy to see you.
Oh, lovely to hear. Well, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything that you have with us today, and sharing of yourself too, your own story. I really appreciate that as well. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks, Beck.
Thank you for listening to When Burnout Becomes Reality podcast. This pod relies on the power of its listeners to push it out to the four corners of the earth in hope that it reaches as many people in need as possible. So please like, share, follow, comment, or leave a review. Pay it forward, and I will be forever grateful. If you'd like to share your burnout to recover experience, or you are an expert working in the burnout field and would like to share your wisdom on the pod, please email me at shannonswales@burnouppsychologysupport.com. To keep up to date with episode releases, please follow us on your favourite podcast provider, or by joining our mailing list at www.burnouppsychologysupport.com. To check out the burnout psychology services on offer at Burnout Psychology Support, my telehealth practice, visit www.burnouppsychologysupport.com/psychology services. Once again, thank you for listening, and please take care of yourself. Bye for now.